My parents replaced me with a celebrity chef to modernize our family restaurant. When they begged me to return, I was already the CEO of the company buying them out. For 18 years, I built my family's restaurant empire from the ground up. I created the signature recipes, negotiated every supplier contract, trained every manager. Then my parents hired a celebrity chef consultant who convinced them I was too traditional and holding the company back. They fired me at a family dinner in front of my younger sister who'd been campaigning to replace me. 6 months later, their empire was crumbling. Health violations, supplier walkouts, staff exodus. When my father finally called begging for help, I was sitting in the CEO office of the restaurant group that had just submitted an acquisition offer. This is my story. The private dining room at Bellini's flagship location smelled like rosemary and betrayal. I remember thinking how strange it was that the garlic bread, my grandmother's recipe, perfected over 3 generations, could smell exactly the same on a night when everything was about to change. My name is Marcus Bellini. I'm 41 years old, and for the past 18 years, I was the invisible engine behind my family's restaurant empire. Before I tell you how their desperate, panicked phone calls led to the most satisfying corporate acquisition of my career, let me take you back to that Wednesday evening when they served me my walking papers alongside the antipasto. My father, Antonio, sat at the head of the long mahogany table, the same table where we'd celebrated countless family milestones: my grandmother's 80th birthday, my parents' 35th anniversary, the opening of our 10th location. Tonight, his expression was different, guarded, rehearsed. My mother, Rosa, occupied her usual spot to his right, but she wouldn't look at me. She kept adjusting the silverware, realigning the napkin, performing tiny, unnecessary tasks to avoid meeting my eyes. I knew that behavior. I'd seen it my whole life whenever she was about to deliver bad news. My younger sister, Gina, sat across from me, and unlike our parents, she made no effort to hide her expression. She was practically glowing with anticipation, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around a wine glass she kept raising to her lips without actually drinking. And then there was Chef Laurent Beaumont, the celebrity consultant my parents had hired 6 months ago to modernize our brand. He sat at the far end of the table like a smug afterthought, his ridiculous handlebar mustache twitching with barely concealed satisfaction. "Marcus," my father began, clearing his throat with that particular rumbling sound that always preceded difficult conversations. "We need to discuss the future direction of Bellini's." I set down my fork. The pasta arrabbiata, another family recipe I'd personally refined over 15 years of testing, suddenly tasted like cardboard. "What about it?" "The consulting engagement with Chef Laurent has been illuminating." My father glanced at the Frenchman, who nodded sagely as if bestowing approval. "He's helped us see areas where we've been, well, stagnant." "Stagnant," I repeated flatly. "The culinary world is evolving, Marcus." This from Gina, who had been waiting for an opening like a predator tracking wounded prey. "Fusion cuisine, molecular gastronomy, Instagram-worthy presentations. We're falling behind while you insist on serving the same dishes Nana made in 1962. "Those dishes built this company," I said, keeping my voice level despite the heat rising in my chest. "They're the reason we have 12 locations across 3 states. They're the reason we have a 2-month waiting list at our flagship." "We're the reason," Chef Laurent interjected, his French accent thick as creme fraiche. "The market has moved on, Monsieur Bellini. Your traditional approach is charming, but it is also holding back your family's potential." I stared at him, this man who had waltzed into our business 6 months ago with his television appearances and his cookbook deals and his complete lack of understanding about what made Bellini special. He had no idea that I'd spent 18 years building relationships with every supplier, that I personally knew the names of the farmers who grew our tomatoes, that I developed systems and processes that kept 12 restaurants running like Swiss watches. "Dad," I said, turning back to my father, "what exactly are we discussing here?" My mother finally looked up, and I saw it, the guilt swimming in her eyes, the same expression she'd worn when she'd told my childhood dog had gone to live on a farm. "We think it's best if you step back from day-to-day operations," my father said, the words coming out in a rehearsed rush. "Chef Laurent has identified significant cost inefficiencies in your department. Your salary alone represents a substantial overhead that could be redirected toward menu innovation and marketing." "You're firing me." The words hung in the air like smoke from a kitchen fire. Nobody contradicted them. "We prefer to think of it as a strategic restructuring," Gina said smoothly, and I recognized the corporate buzzwords she'd picked up from her MBA program, the degree my parents had funded, while I was working 16-hour days keeping their restaurants afloat. "You're firing me," I repeated, "from the family business I've run for 18 years, because a consultant with a cooking show told you I was too expensive." "It's not personal, Marcus. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. It's just business. We can hire 3 operations managers for what we pay you. Chef Laurent has already identified several promising candidates." I looked around the table at these people, my family, my blood, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. Not anger exactly, something colder, clearer. "What about the supplier relationships?" I asked quietly. "Giuseppe Marchetti has been giving us preferred pricing on olive oil for 15 years because of the relationship I built with him. Franco's Meats gives us first pick of their prime cuts because I helped his son get into culinary school. Maria Gonzalez at the produce distributor holds back the best tomatoes for us every week because I attended her daughter's quinceañera." My father waved his hand dismissively. "Those are just vendor relationships. Anyone can manage vendors." "Anyone," I echoed. "Chef Laurent has extensive connections in the culinary world," Gina added. "He'll bring in new suppliers, better suppliers, more sophisticated ingredients for the elevated menu we're developing." I turned to the Frenchman. "Have you ever met Giuseppe Marchetti?" He blinked. "I don't believe so, no." "What about the staff training programs, the kitchen management systems, the health and safety protocols I developed that have given us a perfect inspection record for the past decade?" "Those systems will be documented and transferred," my father said. "Gina will be overseeing operations going forward, with Chef Laurent's guidance on culinary direction." Gina, my 28-year-old sister, who had never worked a single shift in any of our restaurants, who couldn't tell the difference between basil and oregano, who had spent the last 3 years floating between marketing consultant roles at various family businesses while my parents paid her rent. She was going to oversee operations. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back with deliberate control. The legs scraped against the hardwood floor, another detail I'd managed, choosing that specific floor material because it was easier to clean and maintained better acoustics than tile. "I understand," I said, and my voice sounded strange even to my own ears. Flat, distant, like I was speaking from very far away. "Marcus, please don't make this difficult," my mother said, finally finding her voice. "We're still family. This is just a business decision. We can still have Sunday dinners, still celebrate holidays together." "I'll have my office cleared out by Friday," I interrupted. "I assume you'll want me to train my replacement before I leave." My father shifted uncomfortably. "Actually, Chef Laurent thinks a clean break would be best. Fresh start for everyone. We've arranged a severance package, 2 months' salary, and of course you'll maintain your ownership stake in the company." 2 months' salary, for 18 years of building their empire, for missing my college graduation to handle a kitchen emergency, for canceling my honeymoon because a supplier contract needed renegotiating, for working every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every New Year's Eve while they enjoyed the holidays I made possible. "Keep the severance," I said, "and keep the ownership stake. I want nothing from this company." Gina's eyes widened with poorly concealed delight. She probably thought I was being dramatic. She didn't understand that I was cutting myself free. I walked out of the private dining room, past the bustling main floor where servers I had personally trained delivered food prepared by cooks I had personally hired, through the kitchen where the head chef, a woman I'd promoted from line cook 8 years ago, looked up with confusion at my expression. "Mr. Bellini, everything okay?" "It will be, Maria," I said. "It will be." I drove home that night in a numb haze, the streets of the city blurring past like a movie playing at the wrong speed. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, processing what had just happened. 18 years, I had given them 18 years. I had sacrificed relationships, hobbies, sleep, health, everything, to build something I thought mattered to all of us. And they had thrown me away because a French charlatan with a television deal told them I was holding them back. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my home office, surrounded by binders full of supplier contracts, employee training manuals, operational procedures, all the invisible infrastructure that kept Bellini's running smoothly. None of it officially documented in company systems because I'd never had time to transfer it, because I was too busy actually doing the work. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed with an email notification. I almost ignored it, but something made me check. The sender was Catherine Webb, CEO of Sapphire Hospitality Group, the largest restaurant conglomerate in the region, with over 50 locations across 8 states. The subject line read, Confidential Opportunity Discussion. I opened the email and began to read. The days immediately following my termination blurred together in a strange fog of displacement and unexpected clarity. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, I woke up without a mental checklist of supplier calls to make, staff issues to address, inspection reports to review. The silence was deafening. I spent the first week in a kind of limbo, alternating between bitter reflection and a slowly crystallizing sense of purpose. Catherine Webb's email sat in my inbox like a ticking clock. I reread it a dozen times, each reading revealing new layers of implication. She knew, somehow she already knew I'd been let go. The restaurant industry grapevine worked faster than I'd imagined. But more than that, she knew my reputation. She'd been tracking Bellini's success for years, she wrote, and she'd always suspected there was someone behind the scenes whose contributions far exceeded their public visibility. The best restaurants, her email concluded, are never built by the names on the signs. They're built by the people who show up before dawn and leave after midnight. I believe you're one of those people, Marcus. I'd like to discuss what Sapphire could offer someone with your expertise. I waited 3 days before responding. I needed to clear my head, to make sure I wasn't acting out of anger or spite. Whatever I did next needed to be strategic, deliberate, built on a foundation of genuine purpose rather than wounded pride. On day 4, I scheduled a meeting with Catherine for the following week. The Sapphire Hospitality Group headquarters occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming downtown tower. The contrast to Bellini's cramped corporate office, really just a converted storage room behind our flagship location, couldn't have been more stark. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. The reception area featured modern art installations and a small coffee bar staffed by an actual barista. Catherine Webb met me herself at the elevator bank, which told me something about how seriously she was taking this conversation. CEOs didn't typically greet job candidates personally. She was smaller than I'd expected, barely 5'3", but carried herself with the compact authority of someone who had fought for every inch of ground she occupied. Mid-50s, silver-streaked hair cropped short, sharp eyes that seemed to catalog everything they landed on. Marcus Bellini, she said, extending her hand. Her grip was firm and businesslike. I've been wanting to meet you for years. You have. She smiled, gesturing for me to follow her down a glass-walled corridor. Bellini's has been on my radar since I took over Sapphire 8 years ago. Perfect inspection records across every location for a decade. Staff turnover rate 30% below industry average. Supplier relationships that your competitors would kill for. I always wondered who was really running the show. My father built the company. I started, automatic family loyalty kicking in despite everything. Your father built the brand, Catherine interrupted gently. There's a difference. Brands are about perception. Operations are about reality. I've seen the reality of Bellini's, Marcus. The question is whether the people who fired you understand what they've lost. We settled into her corner office, a massive space that somehow felt warm despite its corporate polish. She poured coffee from a French press. Good coffee, I noted, properly brewed, and settled into the chair across from me. Tell me everything, she said. From the beginning, I want to understand what you built. I talked for nearly 2 hours. I told her about starting in the kitchen at 13, washing dishes for minimum wage because my father believed in earning your place. About teaching myself inventory management from library books when I was 16 because our existing system was hemorrhaging money. About the summer I was 19 when a listeria outbreak at a competitor killed 3 people, and I spent 6 months developing safety protocols that exceeded every existing regulation. I told her about the supplier relationships I'd cultivated over decades. Giuseppe Marchetti, whose family had been producing olive oil in Tuscany for 4 generations, had refused to sell to American restaurants until I flew to Italy on my own dime to meet him personally. Franco's Meats gave us exclusive access to their premium cuts because I'd helped his son through a difficult period, connecting him with mentors who changed his life. Maria Gonzalez's produce company had grown alongside Bellini's because I'd honored handshake deals when larger competitors tried to squeeze her out. I explained the training programs I'd developed, not just technical skills, but culture, values, the intangible elements that separated a good restaurant from a great one. I described the management systems, the quality control processes, the crisis response protocols that had saved us from disaster more times than I could count. Catherine listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes on a leather-bound pad. When I finally fell silent, she set down her pen and regarded me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Here's what I'm hearing, she said. You spent 18 years building infrastructure that exists primarily in your head. Your family's restaurants are running on institutional knowledge that no one else possesses, and now they've removed the only person who understands how any of it works. I nodded slowly. What happens when Giuseppe Marchetti's contract comes up for renewal in, she glanced at her notes, 3 months? He'll want to renegotiate personally with whoever represents Bellini's. If that person doesn't know his daughter's name, his wife's birthday, or the story about how his grandfather smuggled olive seedlings out of Italy during the war, the conversation won't go well. And the health inspections. The protocols I developed require specific maintenance schedules, documentation procedures, and staff training refreshers. The knowledge transfer for all of that would take months. I wasn't given any transition time. Catherine leaned back in her chair. Marcus, I'm not just offering you a job, I'm offering you a partnership. She slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a formal offer letter, but the numbers made me blink. Chief Operating Officer. Salary triple what my family had paid me. Significant equity stake in Sapphire Hospitality, and a specific mandate that made my breath catch. Strategic acquisition and integration, I read aloud. Sapphire has grown primarily through acquisition, Catherine explained. We identify undervalued restaurant groups, acquire them at advantageous prices, and integrate them into our operational infrastructure. We've completed 7 acquisitions in the past 4 years, but we've been looking for the right opportunity in the Italian segment for a while now. She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. I won't pretend I recruited you purely for your operational expertise, Marcus. You come with something equally valuable, intimate knowledge of a competitor's vulnerabilities, not technical secrets or proprietary information. I'd never ask you to violate any ethical boundaries, but you understand how Bellini's works at a fundamental level. You know where the weaknesses are, and you know exactly how long it will take for those weaknesses to become critical failures. I stared at the offer letter, my mind racing through implications. You think they're going to fail. I think they've removed the keystone from an arch and don't understand why the ceiling is starting to crack. The question isn't whether they'll fail, it's whether they'll fail gracefully through managed sale or catastrophically through operational collapse. I'd prefer the former for everyone's sake. I thought about my parents, my sister, the hundreds of employees who depended on Bellini's for their livelihoods, the staff I'd hired and trained, the managers I'd mentored, the cooks and servers and hosts who showed up every day because they believed in what we were building. If I take this position, I said slowly, I want certain guarantees. If when an acquisition happens, staff retention has to be a priority, the people who made Bellini's work deserve protection. Catherine nodded without hesitation. Agreed, that's actually standard practice for Sapphire acquisitions. We've found that the institutional knowledge in existing staff is usually more valuable than any other asset we acquire. What else? Giuseppe Marchetti, Franco's Meats, Maria Gonzalez, the suppliers I built relationships with, they need to be offered continued partnerships with fair terms. Also agreed. I took a deep breath, and my grandmother's recipes, the original family recipes that I've spent 2 decades perfecting, they're technically Bellini's intellectual property, but I'm the only one who has the complete versions with all the refinements. I want them protected. Catherine smiled. Marcus, I've eaten at Bellini's. Those recipes are worth more than the real estate. They'll be treated with the respect they deserve. I looked at the offer letter one more time, then I picked up her pen and signed. The next 18 months would prove to be the most professionally satisfying and personally complicated of my life. I started at Sapphire Hospitality on a Monday in March. My office was smaller than Catherine's, but still larger than anything I'd had at Bellini's, with windows overlooking a courtyard garden and a full support staff dedicated to the operations division. For the first few weeks, I focused on learning Sapphire's existing systems, impressive but not flawless, and identifying areas where my experience could add value. I led training sessions on supplier relationship management. I consulted on quality control procedures. I helped negotiate a challenging contract renewal with a major seafood distributor, leveraging techniques I'd developed over years of building trust with vendors. But I also watched and waited. The first signs of trouble at Bellini's emerged almost immediately. My former assistant, a woman named Patricia who had been with the company for 12 years, reached out to me privately 3 weeks after I left. She wasn't asking for a job, not yet, but she needed someone to vent to. It's chaos, Marcus, she said, her voice tight with frustration during a phone call one evening. Chef Laurent changed 4 supplier contracts in the first week, just canceled them, said he had better sources. Giuseppe Marchetti. Gone, he said some very creative Italian phrases when he found out you weren't there anymore, and then he hung up on Gina. I closed my eyes. Giuseppe's olive oil was the foundation of half our signature dishes. Finding a comparable supplier would take months, assuming Gina even understood what comparable meant in this context. What about the kitchen protocols? Patricia's laugh was hollow. Chef Laurent called them bureaucratic overhead. He told the staff to cook with their hearts, not their clipboards. 3 days later, we failed a surprise health inspection at the downtown location. First failed inspection in 11 years. The news hit the trade publications within a week. Bellini's flagship fails health inspection, temporarily closes for remediation. The article was brief and factual, but the damage to the brand's reputation was immediate. Reservations dropped by 30%. I felt nothing, or rather I felt everything: grief, vindication, concern for the staff, but I kept it compartmentalized, locked away where it couldn't affect my professional judgment. Catherine forwarded me the article with a single comment: "Clock is ticking." Over the following months, the clock ticked louder. David Chen, my former head of maintenance, texted me photos of equipment that hadn't been serviced according to the schedules I'd established. Refrigeration units running hot, ventilation systems clogged with grease, small problems that would become expensive emergencies if not addressed. Maria Torres, the head chef I'd promoted years ago, reached out to let me know that 3 of her best line cooks had quit after Chef Laurent criticized their primitive technique in front of customers. She was considering leaving herself. "I built something here," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "We all did, and he's tearing it apart like it was nothing." "Are the recipes still being followed?" I asked, knowing the answer before she spoke. He elevated them, put foam on the carbonara, deconstructed the lasagna into separate components arranged on a square plate. "The regulars are complaining. Some of them have been coming for 20 years, Marcus. They don't want foam." The customer complaints started appearing on review sites within weeks. What happened to Bellini's? Not the same restaurant anymore. Used to be our favorite, now we're looking elsewhere. Occupancy rates dropped, then they dropped again. 3 months after my departure, Bellini's was running at 60% capacity, numbers that would have been a crisis when I was managing operations. My parents called for the first time around the 4-month mark. I let it go to voicemail. My father's message was strained, casual in that forced way that meant he was suppressing panic. "Marcus, it's Dad, just checking in, seeing how you're doing. We should get coffee sometime. Talk about things, let me know." I didn't call back. A week later, my mother tried. Her message was more direct. "Marcus, honey, I know things ended badly, but we're family. We miss you. Your father is under a lot of stress and, well, we could use your advice. Not officially, just family to family. Please call." I didn't call back. By month 6, the situation at Bellini's had progressed from crisis to catastrophe. Franco's Meats terminated their contract after Gina tried to renegotiate for lower prices without understanding the relationship context. Franco himself called me. We'd remained friendly to explain what happened. "She walked in like she owned the place," he said, disgust evident in his voice. "Didn't ask about my son, didn't mention my wife's recovery from surgery, just slapped down a spreadsheet and demanded a 20% reduction. I told her no. She said she'd find another supplier. I said good luck." "Who are they using now?" Franco laughed bitterly. "Some wholesale distributor out of the Midwest. Mass-produced, grade C meat. They're putting it in your grandmother's recipes, Marcus. It's a sin." The health inspection failures continued. 2 more locations were cited for violations: inadequate temperature controls, improper food storage, documentation gaps. The remediation costs were significant, but the reputational damage was worse. Then the staff exodus began in earnest. Maria Torres left first, taking 2 of her remaining senior cooks with her. She'd been recruited by another restaurant group, not Sapphire, though I'd offered, and she departed with a scathing exit interview that somehow leaked to industry publications. "The company I joined 18 years ago no longer exists," she was quoted as saying. "The new leadership has no understanding of what made Bellini's special. They've prioritized flash over substance, trends over tradition, and cost-cutting over quality. I couldn't be part of it anymore." The article landed like a bomb. Industry insiders began openly speculating about Bellini's financial health. Suppliers started requiring payment up front, rather than extending the net 30 terms they'd offered for decades. The credit line at the company's primary bank was quietly reduced. And then, 6 months and 3 days after my departure, I received an email from my father. Not a phone call this time, an email, formal and desperate, with my mother, sister, and Chef Lawrence CC'd. Marcus, we need to discuss the operational situation at Bellini's. I am formally requesting a consulting arrangement to address certain technical challenges. Please advise your availability and hourly rate. I read the email 3 times, marveling at the combination of pride and desperation it represented. Even now, even with everything falling apart, he couldn't bring himself to simply ask for help. He had to frame it as a business transaction, maintaining the fiction that this was a professional matter rather than a family crisis. I forwarded the email to Catherine with a brief note. It's starting. Her response came within minutes. Come to my office. We need to talk strategy. Catherine's office felt different that afternoon. The afternoon light streaming through the windows cast long shadows across her desk, and when I entered, she was standing at the window rather than sitting in her usual position of authority. Close the door, she said without turning around. I did, then waited. Catherine Webb was not a woman who appreciated being rushed. I've been in this business for 32 years, she said finally, still facing the window. Started as a hostess at a steakhouse in Chicago, worked my way up through management, operations, executive positions, built Sapphire from a regional chain into a national hospitality group. She turned to face me. In all that time, I've seen maybe 3 or 4 true operators, people who don't just understand the business intellectually, but feel it in their bones, who can walk into a restaurant and know within minutes whether it's healthy or dying. You're one of those people, Marcus. Thank you, I said, uncertain where this was heading. Here's what I know. She moved to her desk and pulled up data on her monitor. Bellini's is in freefall. Revenue down 43% since you left. Staff turnover has exceeded 70%. 3 locations are operating at a loss. Their primary lender has initiated conversations about loan covenant violations. She clicked to another screen. Your father's personal guarantee on the company's debt means he's facing potential bankruptcy if things continue on their current trajectory. Your mother has been liquidating personal assets, jewelry, a vacation property to inject emergency capital. It's not working. I absorbed this information with a complicated mix of emotions I didn't want to examine too closely. Chef Laurent terminated last month. Apparently, there was an incident involving a customer complaint that escalated to social media. The video went semi-viral, him screaming at a family because they asked for modifications to a dish. The board demanded his resignation. The board is my parents and Gina. And an outside investor they brought in 4 months ago to shore up cash flow. Gerald Morrison, commercial real estate developer, no restaurant experience, purely interested in the property portfolio. I recognized the name. Morrison was known in the industry as a vulture, someone who invested in struggling companies primarily to gain control of their real estate assets. He's positioning for a liquidation, I said. Almost certainly. The question is whether we can move faster. Catherine slid a thick folder across her desk. I opened it to find a detailed acquisition proposal, financial terms, operational integration plans, staffing guarantees, brand strategy documentation. Sapphire is prepared to make a formal offer for Bellini's, she said. The price reflects current market conditions, significantly below what the company was worth a year ago, but it's fair. More importantly, it's enough to satisfy their debt obligations and provide a clean exit for your parents. I flipped through the pages, my mind racing through implications. The offer includes several non-negotiable conditions, Catherine continued. Staff retention programs for all employees meeting performance standards, continued partnerships with original suppliers willing to resume relationships, and she paused. An operational leadership role for you, Marcus. You'd be responsible for integrating Bellini's into Sapphire's portfolio and restoring it to its former quality standards. You want me to run my family's company under Sapphire's ownership. I want you to save what's worth saving. The brand, the recipes, the people. The physical assets and organizational structure are secondary. Those can be rebuilt. What can't be rebuilt is the institutional knowledge, the supplier relationships, the culinary heritage. That's what we're really acquiring. I stared at the proposal, trying to separate my professional judgment from my personal entanglements. My family will see this as a hostile takeover, I said slowly. they'll see me as the architect of their downfall. Catherine shrugged. Your family created their own downfall. You're offering them a lifeboat. Whether they recognize that is up to them. And Morrison, he won't go quietly. Morrison's investment is secured against specific assets. We're prepared to assume those obligations as part of the acquisition. He'll get his money back, probably more than he expected, and move on to his next vulture play. I closed the folder and looked up at Catherine. If I do this when I do this, I want final authority over the integration. No interference from corporate, no pressure to implement synergies that compromise quality. Agreed. And I want the family recipes protected in perpetuity, not just during my tenure, written into the acquisition agreement as a permanent restriction on modification. Our legal team will draft appropriate language. One more thing, I took a breath. When we present the offer, I want to be in the room. I want them to understand that this isn't Sapphire acquiring Bellini's. This is me acquiring Bellini's with Sapphire's backing. Catherine smiled slowly. I was hoping you'd say that. The official offer was delivered to Bellini's registered offices 3 days later. The reaction was immediate and predictable. My phone exploded with calls. My father, my mother, Gina, even Gerald Morrison, though I had no idea how he'd gotten my number. I ignored all of them, letting the legal process unfold as designed. The initial rejection came within 48 hours, accompanied by a formal statement from my father denouncing Sapphire's predatory tactics and vowing to fight the acquisition with every resource at our disposal. The counterattack came from an unexpected angle. Gina gave an interview to a local business publication, framing the situation as a family drama rather than a business transaction. My brother was terminated for cause, she claimed, spinning a narrative that bore no resemblance to reality. He's been orchestrating this hostile takeover as revenge. This isn't about business, it's about ego. The article generated some sympathetic coverage, particularly from commentators who enjoyed underdog stories about family businesses resisting corporate consolidation. For a few days, public sentiment seemed to shift in my family's direction. Then the truth started emerging. Former employees came forward with accounts of what had really happened after my departure, the chaotic management, the abandoned protocols, the mistreatment by Chef Laurent. Industry insiders who'd witnessed the supplier relationship breakdowns shared their perspectives. Trade publications began running deeper investigations that painted a more complete picture. Bellini's, the inside story of a family empire's collapse, read one headline. The article meticulously documented the decisions that had led to the current crisis, with my termination identified as the critical turning point. The tide shifted decisively when Giuseppe Marchetti gave a rare interview to a food industry podcast. His English was accented but clear, and his assessment was devastating. For 20 years I sell only to Bellini's. Why? Because of Marcus. He understand what we do. He respect the tradition. When they fire him, when this new girl calls me like I'm just another vendor, I know the company is finished. You cannot build a great restaurant on disrespect. Similar testimonials followed from other suppliers, former managers, even competitors who'd watched Bellini's implosion with a mixture of satisfaction and genuine sadness. My father's resistance crumbled within weeks. Morrison, recognizing that the company's value was declining faster than he could liquidate assets, became an unexpected ally in pushing for acceptance of Sapphire's offer. The final board meeting, my parents Gina and Morrison, took place on a Tuesday evening, exactly 8 months after my termination. I wasn't present, but the outcome was communicated to me within the hour. Bellini's had accepted Sapphire's acquisition offer. I sat alone in my office that night, looking out at the city lights, trying to identify what I was feeling. Vindication, certainly. Satisfaction, yes, though it was complicated, but beneath everything else was something I hadn't expected: grief. Grief for what should have been, for the future we could have built together if they'd only listened. The integration would begin the following week, and that meant seeing my family face to face for the first time since they'd served me my termination alongside the antipasto. The first integration meeting was scheduled for a Monday morning at Bellini's flagship location, the same building where I'd spent most of my adult life, the same conference room where I'd been fired. I arrived early before anyone else, wanting a few moments alone with my memories. The building looked the same from outside, same brick facade, same brass signage, same welcoming glow from the windows, but inside the differences were immediately apparent. The dining room, usually immaculate at this hour, showed signs of neglect. Tables weren't properly aligned. Menus in the host station were worn and poorly organized. The distinctive smell of the place, garlic, fresh bread, wood polish, was muted, overwhelmed by something chemical and institutional. I walked through the kitchen, running my fingers along equipment I'd selected personally years ago. The maintenance schedules posted on the walls were outdated. Inventory logs showed gaps and inconsistencies. The reach-in refrigerator that should have been replaced last summer was making an ominous humming sound. Marcus. I turned to find David Chen, my former maintenance director, standing in the doorway. He looked older than he had 8 months ago, lines of stress etched around his eyes. David, you're still here. Someone had to hold things together. He walked over and shook my hand firmly, barely, but still here. How bad is it, really? He laughed, a weary sound without much humor. Remember that nightmare scenario you used to warn your father about, the one where everything fails at once because no one maintained the systems. I remember. We're living it, refrigerations failing across 3 locations. The point-of-sale system crashed twice last month. We were running on paper tickets like it was 1985. Half the kitchen equipment needs servicing we can't afford. He shook his head. And that's just the physical infrastructure. The staff situation is worse. I heard about Maria leaving. Maria was first, then Eduardo, then the Chen twins, then pretty much everyone with enough experience to get hired somewhere else. What's left is a skeleton crew of newbies who have never seen this place run properly. I absorbed this, making mental notes of priorities for the integration plan. They're going to be here soon, David said. Your parents, Gina, I should warn you they're not in good shape, your father especially. I think this whole thing nearly killed him. David. I know it's not your fault. Everyone who actually worked here knows that, but they're still your family, Marcus. Whatever else happened, that's still true. I didn't have a response to that. Before I could formulate one, I heard voices in the corridor. My mother's distinctive cadence, my father's heavier tread, the sharp click of Gina's heels. The door opened. My mother entered first, stopping short when she saw me. She looked smaller than I remembered, frailer, as if the past 8 months had aged her a decade. My father followed, and I was shocked by the change in him. His hair had gone completely gray. His posture, once commanding, was stooped. His eyes, when they met mine, held none of the cold authority I'd faced in this room 8 months ago. Gina came last, and she at least looked the same, polished, professional, defensive. She positioned herself beside our parents like a shield, glaring at me with undisguised hostility. Marcus, my father said, his voice rough. Just my name, nothing else. Dad, Mom, Gina. Silence stretched between us, 8 months of distance compressed into a few feet of conference room. We should begin, I said finally, gesturing to the table. There's a lot to cover. The meeting was excruciating. Catherine had insisted I lead it. This was my integration, my vision, but every agenda item felt like an autopsy of my family's failures. We discussed staffing, 63% turnover since my departure, with experienced employees replaced by undertrained substitutes who'd never known the old standards. We discussed supplier relationships. Most of the long-standing partnerships I'd built had been damaged or destroyed, requiring either painful rebuilding efforts or entirely new arrangements. We discussed operational systems. The protocols I'd developed had been abandoned, simplified, or ignored, leaving critical gaps in food safety, equipment maintenance, and quality control. Through it all, my family sat in silence. My mother occasionally wiped her eyes. My father stared at the table. Gina took notes with mechanical precision, her face blank. Finally, we reached the section I'd been dreading, personnel decisions. Sapphire's standard integration process includes a comprehensive performance review of all management positions, I explained. Based on our assessment, certain structural changes will be necessary. I felt rather than saw Gina tense across the table. Gina, I continued, keeping my voice professionally neutral, your position as head of operations will be eliminated. You'll be offered a severance package consistent with your tenure, or alternatively, a position in Sapphire's marketing division at a substantially reduced salary and responsibility level. You're firing me, her voice was flat. I'm restructuring operations under qualified leadership. Marketing may be a better fit for your skill set. My skill set, she laughed bitterly. You've been waiting for this. This whole thing, this takeover, it's just revenge. You couldn't handle being fired, so you engineered this whole situation to humiliate us. Gina, my mother started. No, Gina stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. No, I'm not going to sit here and pretend this is a legitimate business meeting. This is my brother settling scores. He's not saving the company, he's taking it. Because he can. Because we gave him the opportunity when we should have. Should have what? I interrupted, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. Should have kept me. Should have listened when I warned you about exactly this scenario. Should have valued the 18 years of work I put into this company instead of listening to a consultant who told you what you wanted to hear. I stood as well, facing my sister across the conference table. I didn't create this situation, Gina. You did. You and Mom and Dad, when you decided I was an expense to be cut rather than an asset to be valued. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because if I don't intervene, hundreds of people will lose their jobs, decades of family legacy will disappear, and everything I built will be destroyed completely. I'm here because despite everything you did, despite the humiliation and the betrayal and the years of being taken for granted, I still care about what happens to this company and the people who work here. I'm not proud of that. Some days I wish I could just walk away and let it burn. But I can't because unlike you, I actually understand what's at stake. The silence that followed was absolute. My father's head was bowed. My mother was crying silently. Gina stood frozen, her face cycling through emotions too quickly to read. The offer stands, I said finally, sitting back down and collecting my papers. Marketing division, reduced salary, probationary status. You have 48 hours to decide. The meeting concluded shortly after. My family filed out without another word, leaving me alone in the conference room where my career at Bellini's had begun and ended. David appeared in the doorway a few minutes later. That was hard to watch, he said quietly. It was harder to do. Are you okay? I considered the question seriously before answering. No, but I will be, and so will this company. The restoration of Bellini's took the better part of a year. It was the most challenging professional undertaking of my life, and the most rewarding. I started with the fundamentals, the systems and processes that had made the company run smoothly for decades. The maintenance schedules were reestablished. The food safety protocols were reinstated and reinforced. The inventory management systems were updated and properly documented. Then I tackled the supplier relationships. Giuseppe Marchetti was my first call. I reached him on a Sunday morning, knowing he'd be in his office reviewing the week's production schedules. Marcus, his voice was gruff with surprise. Is it really you? It's really me, Giuseppe. I'm calling to discuss a business relationship. There was a long pause. You're back at Bellini's. In a manner of speaking, I'm running the integration for the company that acquired it, and my first priority is restoring our partnership, if you're willing. Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice was different, warmer, with a hint of the affection we'd built over 2 decades. 20 years, Marcus. 20 years we did business together. Not once did you disrespect me. Not once did you treat me like just another vendor. And then they fire you and send this girl who doesn't even know my name, who talks about competitive pricing like I'm selling vegetables at a farmer's market. I know, I'm sorry that happened. You're sorry, he laughed, but there was emotion underneath it. All right, Marcus, let's talk, but not on the phone. You come to Tuscany, you sit at my table, we share wine and food, and you tell me everything that happened, then we discuss business. I flew to Italy the following week. The trip was partly professional. The olive oil relationship was critical to restoring Bellini's quality, but partly personal. I needed to rebuild trust, and that couldn't be done through conference calls and contracts. Giuseppe's estate was exactly as I remembered it, rolling hills covered with olive groves, a stone farmhouse that had been in his family for generations, the distinctive smell of pressing oil that permeated everything. He met me at the door with an embrace that lasted longer than professional norms would dictate. Come, he said, first we eat, then we talk. We ate lunch on his terrace overlooking the groves, fresh bread, local cheese, vegetables from his garden, and of course, olive oil so pure and perfect it brought tears to my eyes. We talked about family. His daughter had just had her first grandchild, about business. The European market was increasingly competitive, about life. He was thinking about retirement maybe in a few years. Only after the meal, over glasses of limoncello, his wife had made from their own lemon trees, did we discuss Bellini's. I told him everything, the firing, the consultant, the slow collapse, the acquisition. He listened without interrupting, his weathered face revealing nothing. And now, he asked when I finished, what do you want from me? I want to restore our partnership. Same terms as before, actually, better terms if you need them. I want your oil in our kitchens again, Giuseppe. I want to serve food that's worthy of what you produce. He was silent for a long moment. You know what I liked most about working with you, he said finally. You never treated my oil like a commodity. You understood that each batch was different, that the terroir and the weather and the timing of the harvest all mattered. You cared about the craft. I learned that from you. And I learned things from you too, about running a business, about managing relationships, about building something that lasts. He leaned forward. The company that acquired you, Sapphire, they understand this. They won't push you to cut costs by switching to industrial suppliers. I have full authority over ingredient sourcing. It's in my contract. He nodded slowly. Then we have a deal, Marcus, but I want one thing in exchange. Name it. Teach your people, train them the way you were trained. Build relationships with my grandchildren the way you built relationships with me. Don't let what you know die with you. I reached across the table and gripped his hand. I promise. The supplier restoration continued over the following months. Franco's meats required more delicate negotiation. Franco was still angry about how Gina had treated him, but eventually agreed to resume partnership on condition of a formal apology from Bellini's ownership, which I drafted and Catherine signed. Maria Gonzalez's produce company was eager to return, and we expanded our relationship to include exclusive access to her premium seasonal offerings. Parallel to the supplier work, I focused on rebuilding the staff. Maria Torres returned first. I'd stayed in touch with her throughout the transition, and when I officially took over integration, I called with an offer she couldn't refuse: head of culinary operations for all Bellini's locations, with a significant salary increase and equity participation in the integration's success. You're serious, she said when I laid out the terms, after everything that happened. You spent 18 years building something extraordinary in our kitchens. Chef Laurent destroyed most of it in 6 months. I need someone who remembers what extraordinary looks like. I need you, Maria. She started the following Monday. With Maria's help, we began recruiting, reaching out to former employees who'd left under Chef Laurent's reign, identifying talented cooks in other organizations who might be attracted by Bellini's restoration story. Within 3 months, we'd rebuilt the kitchen teams at all 12 locations with a combination of returning veterans and carefully selected new talent. The training programs I developed years ago were dusted off, updated, and implemented with renewed rigor. Every new hire went through a comprehensive orientation that covered not just technical skills, but the values and traditions that made Bellini's special. My grandmother's recipes were taught the way she taught them to me, not just as instructions, but as stories, connections to history and family and community. Slowly, the numbers began to improve. Occupancy rates climbed. Customer reviews turned positive. The health inspection record was restored to perfection. 6 months into the integration, Catherine called me to her office. I have something to show you, she said, pulling up data on her monitor. Bellini's performance metrics compared to our initial projections. The numbers were striking. Revenue had recovered to 90% of pre-crisis levels. Profit margins were actually higher than before, thanks to operational efficiencies we'd implemented during the restructuring. Customer satisfaction scores were approaching historic highs. You've exceeded every benchmark we set, Catherine said, in half the time we projected. The foundation was still there, I replied. The recipes, the supplier relationships, the institutional knowledge. It was damaged but not destroyed. We just needed to rebuild on what remained. There's something else. She clicked to another screen. I've been watching the team you've assembled. The former employees who returned, the new hires you've trained, the suppliers who have renewed their partnerships. They're not just working for a paycheck, Marcus. They're working for you, for what you represent. What are you saying? I'm saying that what you've built here is bigger than Bellini's integration. It's a model for how we should approach every acquisition. The emphasis on relationships, on institutional knowledge, on preserving what makes a company special while fixing what's broken. She paused. I want you to formalize it. Create a methodology that other integration leaders can follow. Teach what you've learned. I thought about Giuseppe's request in Tuscany, about the promise I'd made to pass on what I knew. I can do that. Good, because I also want to discuss something else. Catherine pulled out a folder, different from the usual financial reports and operational updates. Your contract is up for renewal in 3 months. I want to talk about the future. The future, for so long, I'd been focused on the present, on surviving the crisis, executing the integration, restoring what had been lost. I hadn't allowed myself to think too far ahead. What did you have in mind? Catherine smiled. Let's discuss it over dinner. I know a place with excellent olive oil. A year after the acquisition, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. My assistant buzzed with a hesitant tone. Mr. Bellini, there's a Mr. Antonio Bellini here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's personal. I felt my stomach clench. I hadn't spoken to my father since the integration meeting. Our only communications had been through lawyers and intermediaries. Send him in. The man who walked through my door was barely recognizable as the commanding patriarch who had sat at the head of our family table for decades. He moved slowly, almost shuffling, his once-proud shoulders rounded. His eyes, when they met mine, held none of the cold authority I remembered, only uncertainty and something that looked like fear. Marcus, his voice cracked on my name. Dad, sit down. He settled into the chair across from my desk, the same configuration we'd been in 1,000 times before, but with our positions reversed. I was behind the desk now. He was the visitor. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was thick with unspoken words, unaddressed grievances, years of accumulated distance. I don't know how to do this, he said finally. I've practiced this conversation 100 times, and I still don't know how to begin. Then let me, I leaned forward. Why are you here, Dad? Because I was wrong. The words came out in a rush, as if he'd been holding them back for months. About everything. About you, about the company, about what matters. I was wrong, and I didn't know how to admit it, and by the time I understood, it was too late. It was too late when you fired me in front of my sister, and a man you'd known for 6 months. It was too late when you chose his advice over my 18 years of experience. It was too late when you treated me like a line item to be cut, instead of a son who had given you everything. He flinched at each point, but didn't look away. Yes, all of that is true. I don't have excuses, Marcus. I have reasons, but they're not good enough. Tell me anyway. He took a deep breath. The Florida investment. We lost almost $3 million. Your mother's retirement funds, the emergency reserves I'd built over 30 years, all of it gone. And Paul was there, whispering in my ear about ways to recover. Cut costs, streamline operations, modernize the business. He made it sound so logical. Paul was positioning to buy you out for nothing. I know that now. I knew it within months of your departure when his lawyer accidentally forwarded documents to our accountant. My father's face twisted with bitter self-recrimination. My best friend for 40 years, and he was circling like a vulture the whole time. But that's not an excuse for what I did to you. Paul didn't make me fire my son. I made that choice. Why though? The question I'd been holding for over a year finally emerged. I warned you. I gave you 5 years of detailed analyses showing exactly what would happen if the systems weren't properly maintained. You ignored all of it. Why? My father was quiet for a long moment. Because you were always better than me, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. From the time you were 15 years old, organizing the inventory better than I ever had, learning systems I couldn't understand, building relationships I couldn't match. Every year, you became more essential to the company's success, and every year I felt more like a figurehead in my own business. He looked up at me, and I saw tears forming in his eyes. I built Bellinis with these hands, Marcus. I worked 18-hour days for decades. I sacrificed everything to create something that would outlast me. And then my son, my brilliant, capable son, made himself so indispensable that I started to feel like a stranger in my own company. So you got rid of me. I told myself it was business. I told myself it was about costs and modernization and all the rational things Paul kept feeding me. But underneath all of that, I was afraid. Afraid that Bellini's wasn't really mine anymore. Afraid that everyone knew you were the one actually running things. The confession hung in the air between us. It was more honest than anything my father had ever said to me, more honest, perhaps, than he'd ever been with himself. Do you know what I felt that night? I asked quietly, in the conference room when you told me I was too expensive to keep. He shook his head, not trusting his voice. I felt relieved. The words surprised me as they emerged. Relieved that I finally knew where I stood. Relieved that I could stop pretending that my contributions mattered to this family. Relieved that I could walk away without guilt, because you'd made it so clear that I was nothing more than a cost to be managed. Marcus, I gave you everything, Dad. Every idea, every hour, every relationship I built. I gave it all to Bellini's because I thought we were building something together, something that mattered to all of us, and you threw me away because you were threatened by my competence. My father broke down completely. Sobs racked his body as years of suppressed emotion finally found release. I watched him cry, this man who had seemed invincible throughout my childhood, and felt something inside me shift. "I'm sorry," he gasped between sobs. "I'm so sorry, Marcus, I failed you. As a father, as a partner, as a human being, I failed you and I don't know how to make it right." I stood and walked around my desk. I pulled a chair next to his and sat down, close enough to reach out and touch his shoulder. "You can't make it right," I said quietly. "The past is done. The choices you made, the damage they caused, that can't be undone." He nodded miserably. "But we can build something different going forward, not the same relationship we had before. That's gone, but maybe something new, something more honest." He looked up at me, desperate hope flickering in his tear-streaked eyes. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "I don't deserve it." "No, you don't, and I'm not there yet. I may never be." I took a breath. "But I'm willing to try, to have dinner occasionally, to talk about things that aren't business, to see if we can be family again in some form." "That's more than I deserve." "Yes, it is, but you're still my father, and despite everything, I don't want to spend the rest of my life holding on to this anger." We sat together in silence for a long time, not comfortable exactly, but not hostile either. It was a beginning, a fragile, tentative beginning. When my father finally left, I remained at the window, looking out at the city lights. David had been right, I realized. They were still my family. Whatever else happened, that was still true. The question now was what we would build from the wreckage. 2 years after the acquisition, I stood in the newly renovated flagship kitchen of Bellini's, watching a group of young culinary students learn my grandmother's carbonara recipe from Maria Torres. The kitchen gleamed with new equipment, properly maintained, meticulously documented, integrated with systems I'd designed to ensure nothing was ever forgotten again. But the heart of it remained unchanged. The recipes passed down through generations, the techniques refined over decades, the commitment to quality that had always been Bellini's true competitive advantage. The secret, Maria was explaining to the rap students, isn't in any single ingredient. It's in the balance, the timing, the attention you bring to every step. Mr. Bellini's grandmother used to say that good food requires good faith, faith in your ingredients, faith in your technique, faith in yourself. I smiled at the memory. My grandmother had indeed said that, and I'd carried her words with me through every challenge of my career. Catherine Webb appeared at my elbow, having slipped into the kitchen unnoticed. "Impressive operation," she said, nodding at the training session. "This is the 4th cohort you've put through. 5th, we've trained over 60 young chefs now. Many of them have moved into leadership positions at other Bellini's locations. A few have gone on to start their own restaurants. Building your own legacy within the legacy. Something like that." We walked together through the back corridors, past storage rooms and prep areas, and the temperature-controlled space where Giuseppe Marchetti's olive oil was stored at precise conditions. "I have something for you," Catherine said, producing an envelope from her jacket pocket. "The board approved it this morning." I opened the envelope and found a formal offer letter. President of Sapphire Hospitality's Restaurant Division, oversight of the entire Italian portfolio, plus strategic authority over new acquisitions in the European market. This is the logical next step. You've proven yourself with Bellini's. Now it's time to apply what you've learned at scale. I studied the terms, the salary, the equity participation, the scope of responsibility. It was everything I might have dreamed of once, a vindication of everything I'd worked for. "There's a condition, though," Catherine continued, "one I insisted on." "What's that?" "The Bellini's brand stays under your direct supervision. No matter how big your responsibilities grow, you remain personally accountable for the quality and integrity of these restaurants. That's non-negotiable." "Why?" She smiled, "Because you understand something that most executives forget as they climb higher. These aren't just businesses. They're communities, they're families, they're living things that require constant attention and care. Bellini's will only remain special as long as someone who truly understands that is watching over it." I looked back toward the kitchen, where Maria was demonstrating the precise wrist motion required for proper pasta integration. "I accept." Later that evening, I had dinner at the flagship location, not as an executive reviewing operations, but as a customer. I sat at a corner table with a glass of wine and a plate of carbonara, remembering all the nights I'd worked late in this building, all the crises I'd managed, all the small victories that had accumulated into something larger than any of us. My phone buzzed with a text from an unexpected source. Gina. Heard about the promotion. Congratulations, you earned it. I stared at the message for a long moment. My relationship with Gina had remained distant since the integration. She'd taken the marketing position I'd offered, but we'd maintained strictly professional boundaries. Thank you, I typed back. How are things in marketing? Learning a lot, different than I expected, better in some ways. Want to get coffee sometime, talk about non-work things. A long pause, then I'd like that. It wasn't reconciliation, exactly, but it was movement. I finished my carbonara slowly, savoring each bite, thinking about the grandmother who had created this recipe and the generations of Bellinis who had refined it. The legacy wasn't in the buildings or the balance sheets. It was in the taste of perfect pasta, in the relationships with suppliers who had become friends, in the staff who showed up every day because they believed in what we were building. My parents called as I was paying the check. I answered, something I wouldn't have done a year ago. Marcus, my mother said, her voice warm, your father and I wanted to congratulate you. We heard about the promotion. Thank you, Mom. We're proud of you, sweetheart. We always were, even when we were too foolish to show it. I felt something loosen in my chest, not complete forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of something like peace. Sunday dinner, I found myself asking, at the house. A surprised pause. We'd love that very much. I'll bring dessert. I ended the call and sat for another moment in the restaurant I'd built, then torn apart, then rebuilt again. The circle was completing itself, but it was a different circle now, one I'd drawn on my own terms. The future stretched out ahead of me, full of possibilities I couldn't have imagined 2 years ago. New restaurants to acquire, new relationships to build, new legacies to create. But first, Sunday dinner with my family, and my grandmother's tiramisu recipe, passed down through generations, and finally finding its way home. Looking back now, 3 years after that Wednesday evening, when my family served me my termination, I can see the patterns I was too close to recognize at the time. My parents didn't fire me because they didn't love me. They fired me because they didn't understand me, didn't understand that competence isn't a threat, that expertise isn't a challenge to authority, that building on someone else's foundation doesn't diminish what came before. They were afraid of change, afraid of losing control, afraid of admitting they'd made mistakes, and in their fear, they listened to the wrong voices and made the wrong choices. I could have responded with revenge. The opportunity was certainly there. I had the knowledge to destroy what they'd built, the connections to accelerate their downfall, the legal standing to extract maximum damage. Instead, I chose restoration, not because I'm a better person than they deserved, but because destruction would have been a betrayal of everything I'd spent my life building. The recipes, the relationships, the commitment to excellence, those things were bigger than my anger. They deserved to survive, even if my parents didn't deserve to keep them. The acquisition of Bellini's by Sapphire wasn't revenge, it was rescue. Today, Bellini's operates 18 locations across 5 states. Our occupancy rates exceed pre-crisis levels. Our staff retention is among the highest in the industry. Giuseppe Marchetti's grandson now handles our olive oil account, continuing a relationship that spans 3 generations. My father comes to work occasionally, not in any official capacity, but as a consultant of sorts. He walks through the kitchens, talks to staff, shares stories about the early days. The employees seem to enjoy his visits, and I think being connected to the business helps him feel whole. My mother has taken up volunteering at a culinary school, teaching young chefs the traditional techniques that made Bellini's famous. She says it's the most fulfilling work she's ever done. Gina has become one of Sapphire's most effective marketing directors. We have coffee every few weeks now, awkward at first, then gradually easier. We don't talk about the past much. There's no point. And me, I'm still building, still learning, still trying to honor the legacy my grandmother started when she first wrote down her recipes in a weathered notebook, never imagining they would feed millions of people. The truth I've learned about family businesses is this: they're not about the family. They're about what the family creates together, the product, the service, the relationships, the values. When those things are strong enough, they can survive even the worst failures of the family itself. My family failed me, but what we built together didn't fail. It was tested, nearly destroyed, and ultimately emerged stronger because someone cared enough to fight for it. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with the same qualities that built it in the first place: patience, expertise, relationships, and an unshakable commitment to doing things the right way. That's my legacy now, and I'm just getting started.